Sid Turner. He's accompanied by his wife Bonnie, and I think there's some more family members. Right? Right? Yeah.
Granddaughter.
Right. And Sid was raised in Atlanta, but he got here as soon as he could. Because most of his ancestors were from up here in the mountains, like Henry Barone, William R. McConnell, Absalom Hooker, Knox Waldrop, and others that I don't know right now, but others. So I know Sid from the SAR, Sons of the American Revolution, and his activity in all the reenactments and grave markings and stuff like that. So the program tonight is Company D, 24th Regiment, Georgia Volunteer Infantry, Army of Northern Virginia, Confederate States of America, Towns County, Georgia, known as the Hiawassee Volunteers. The Hiawassee Volunteers. We got interested in this because you'll remember when we had the lady from the school and the FFA giving that program about the old Carter Cemetery there. Okay. A letter was written by somebody, William Carter, and it mentioned several people in this particular regiment. And so that intrigues Sid's interest. And he got to research into people that were in the letter and what happened to them. And this is not just boring names. I mean, anybody can look up a name and date, but that doesn't grab you. He has researched into the people and makes them human beings. So without further ado, Sid, it's all yours.
I'm going to try two things. I've got a little bit of scratch in my voice tonight. If I get over at the table and talk and you can't hear me, let me know. And I'll bring the relics back up to the microphone. The first thing I want to do is give out a roster of everybody that was in Company D, 24th Georgia Infantry Regiment, because they were mustered in Towns County. And probably a lot of y'all are kin to them and may or may not know about it. Okay, we're going to give half over here, half over here. There's about 50 copies. If you're husband and wife, you might want to take just one copy and make sure the local people from Hiawassee get a copy too. You can. Kind of history I like the chronology of the history just to know. Can y'all hear me? I like the chronology because it tells what happened and when and what led up to what. But what I really like is to know what the average person felt like when they were going through these events. So history is people, it's not dates. People get confused the way they teach it sometimes. But the history is all about people. You can take a kind of a bland object like this, and then you can tell a little bit about it. Norman Hastings enlisted for 9 months into Company C, 45th Massachusetts Infantry. They went directly down to Moorhead, North Carolina, to help support the activity of the Union soldiers down there in the occupation. They got into some skirmishes. They finished their 9-month enlistment. They got on a steamboat and started heading back. 3 days before he got back home, he died at sea. The personal effects that they gave him to his relatives after he died included this hanging. Dr. Eugene Broadus was in the Company B, 9th Virginia Cavalry. He was from Caroline County. They call themselves Caroline County Rangers. He was sitting at home, well, actually at a friend's house on the porch, and the Yankees surprised him and killed him. He had this handkerchief in his pocket when he died. June 30th, 1863, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the day before the battle started. John Buford's cavalry came into town. There was a Union soldier that was in that unit, and he saw a little girl, 7-year-old, Emma Young. She was playing in front of her house, and he wanted to sit down and talk to her. And he sat down a little bit, and he told about his daughter he had at home. He didn't think he'd ever get back to see her again. And in this conversation he asked if he could get her to hug him and kiss him on the cheek like his daughter did. She went and asked her mother if it was okay to do this. And due to the unusual circumstances, the mother said, yeah, it's okay. So, in appreciation, when he got ready to ride off, he gave Emma this silk handkerchief. And she treasured it the rest of her life. And she carried it until 1946 when she died. Now on this table here, I also have some Confederate money. They're from the state of Georgia. And anything at that time, anything that looked like money, when the Confederacy passed for money. There was a defunct bank that went out of business in the 1840s in Mississippi. The Mississippi soldiers took all the defunct banknotes to where they were going in the Confederacy, and they used it like regular money. There was also some counterfeiting going on during that period. This is a piece of counterfeit Confederate money. And it wasn't worth much then, but it's kind of considered a collectible today. You might want to. Oh, while I'm talking about this, all of this I'm going to invite y'all to come up and look at when we're done. I'm a hands-on guy. The only thing I ask is leave the money in the protected folder. And I'll get to this next, but these are 2 bone rings that were made by prisoners during the Civil War. When they sat around, they were bored, they didn't have anything to do, all day on their hands in the prisons trying to take their mind off of the misery. They would sometimes work on crafts and stuff. These are 2 real rings. They were made out of soup bones. You can pick them up, look at them, and I invite you to do that. Just don't try and squeeze it on your finger because your finger might be too fat. And I don't know if the bone hold up to it. I also have some bullets here. Now the soldiers didn't just use bullets to shoot at each other. When they didn't have stuff, they used bullets for just about everything. They made bottle stoppers out of bullets. They made fish sinkers out of bullets. They made pencils out of bullets. Believe it or not, you could take a conical bullet and make it to a sharp point, and it would draw. We talked about pencil lead, now it's graphite. Originally it was lead, and you can write just like you would with a pencil, and it looks like a pencil. So what I have here is bullets that were made into chess pieces. You can look at those and readily see the chess pieces. I also have some that are round and flat. They could have been used as checkers. They also used them as poker chips. If come up, feel free to handle the bullets like that too. This is an original pair of boots. You can tell the style because this piece of leather is a solid piece going all the way up the front. Modern boots today only come up to here and have a piece that joins in from here up. I brought these shoes particularly because I wanted you to see different styles of shoes. These aren't original, those are. But these are reenactment shoes, but I want you to look at the bottom where the soles are held in place with pegs. They also put heel plates on so that their shoes wouldn't wear out so bad in the campaign. And it's kind of interesting too. The biggest land battle in North America was the Battle of Gettysburg. happened because Henry Heath sent Pettigrew's brigade into Gettysburg looking for supplies, primarily shoes. These are a couple of hats. They had different kind of hats. In the early war, they favored khaki. It was like a French design, and they just studied the French. French had been in the Crimean War. They wanted to be in there and say they're pretty good. In fact, McClellan went to study with the French, and they wanted to get anything they could to look French. This is a forage cap that is kind of the same line as that. As the war went on, they went more into a more practical hat. A soft hat that had a good brim on it that would keep the weather off of it, the sun and the rain. This is a sword. Swords were not used as much as people think in sword fights and stuff, or cavalry raids and hacking at each other. They were more a symbol of authority. They were also used in battle. You could hear the sound of the battle, over the sound of the battle. John Wesley Powell, one armed man that's famous for exploring the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. He lost his arm at the Battle of Shiloh. He was a captain in the artillery. And he had his sword up over his head like this, getting ready to bring it down and tell him to fire. And he had it up like this, a counter battery fire from the other side, the enemy. Cannonball hit his arm there and took it off. That's how he became a one-armed man to go about the Grand Canyon. Another thing they did was the Battle of Gettysburg on the third day in Pickett's charge. Lou Armstead wanted to lead his men in the battle. He wanted to make sure they saw him and where he was going. So he takes his hat and puts it on his sword. He said, for the honor of the Virginia, follow me. You go to charge in a battle like that. I also have a pair of original wooden crutches, Civil War crutches. These are kind of interesting because this part right here is split. It's a single piece of wood, but they split it to make it into part of the top where they handle it. I also brought a bunch of cannonballs and Civil War relics. Artillery shells. Because I thought y'all may or may not know about artillery. You might want to get interested in artillery. This particular one right here, and I'm going to invite y'all to come up and handle these if you want to too. This is a 30-pound parrot shell. It's solid shot. It's solid iron. And it's heavy. Now, I grew up near in the part of Atlanta. My high school was about 2 blocks from where DeGrass's battery was in the Battle of Atlanta. DeGrasse was the Union battery that fired the first shells into Atlanta during the Atlanta campaign in the battle itself. He fired a 20-pound parrot shell. So I made it a point to get me a 20-pound parrot shell. This is a 20-pound parrot shell cut in half so you can see what they look like. What they did, some of them were simple shells. You just had the gunpowder. The shell itself would break, make shrapnel. Then they would put balls in there like canister. And then put the powder in here, and the balls were in the matrix. And when it would explode, it would also make like shrapnel and throw these balls around too. So it was really anti-personnel. The parrot shells was a rifle cannon, by the way. They had smooth bore cannons too, and they shot round balls like this. This is a 6-pound solid shot. It's from Selma Arsenal. But Robert E. Lee really liked round balls in combat. When you shot them at people, they just keep on going. If it went through one guy, it'd just keep going, go through the next. If it hit him, it'd keep on going through the next. I read accounts of where soldiers would see a round ball rolling up to them, and they thought, man, this is coming slow enough, I'll just stop it with my foot. So they stick your foot out to stop it, and the cannonball takes your foot off. These things did a lot more damage than what they looked like. This is a Britain shell, and it was made to break into small pieces of shrapnel. If you look at it on the inside, it almost looks like it would be a mold for a pineapple grenade. And I think this is kind of interesting too. This was a James shell. It's got an interesting kind of bird cage on the bottom. It makes it look kind of cute, I think. But you wouldn't see this when you saw this shell ready to be fired. What this did is it held a band of lead. And when the cannon shot, the lead would go, because of these holes in here, the explosion would go through the holes, bust the lead out, and the lead would catch the rifle. I brought some rifles here. This particular one is a Richmond carbine. Richmond was made by parts that they had from captured guns. They take a piece from this gun, a piece from that gun, a piece from that gun. They put it together and they made the Richmond rifles. It's a Confederate gun and it's kind of an interesting piece. You might want to look at it. It's also a muzzle loader. I'm sorry. The muzzle loader, you take out the ramrod, and then you put your charge in there. Then you got to ram it down, bullet, charge, and everything. Then you got to take your ramrod back out, and then you reseat it in here so you don't lose it. And then you come back up and go to half cock, and you put a percussion cap on the nipple. That's what makes it fire. And then you go ahead and fire. That you could probably do maybe. I've heard people say you do 3 shots in a minute. I don't believe that. I shot in competition, and we would do them as fast as we could. But you're talking about doing all that and resetting the thing, and then coming up and taking the main shot, and then getting off 3 of them in a minute. The most I could ever do was 2 in a minute. And we even cheated a little bit. We'd have a bayonet stuck in the ground, have our ramrod there, so we didn't have to reseat it every time. We could just pull it up, use it, put it back down. And even cheating like that, the best I could do was 2 shots in a minute. This is a model 1846 smoothbore musket. Same thing, it's a muzzle loader. It's smoothbore, it shot a round ball. It wasn't as accurate as the rifle gun. This is a Maynard carbine. The carbines were made for the cavalry use while they're riding on a horse. It was a shorter version of a rifle. And you can even see this D-ring here that has this little ring on the slide. What they do is they'd have like a bandolier or shoulder strap that had a hook on it, and they'd hook it on the strap. And when they're on the horse and they need it, they bring it up and they use it. This is a breeching gun. It breaches. And you put a metal cartridge in there. But the metal cartridge didn't have a primer like they do now. You still have to pull the hammer back, put a percussion cap on the nipple, and shoot. And every time you could load it quicker, but you still had to use that percussion cap. This is a Smith carbine. And it's the same kind of thing. It's got the D-ring, it's got the ring there. It's a breech mark, and you breach it by pushing this little trigger here that takes that spring, pushes it up over that knob. It was a metal cartridge. You still had to put the percussion cap on. A little historic sideline, if you're interested. When Jesse Gaines went into Northfield, Minnesota on the Northfield, Minnesota ride, got his gang all shot up. When they went into the bank, there was a young guy in medical school that was home at the time, and he knew what was going on. He knew that the hardware store man kept a shotgun behind his counter, kept a gun behind his counter. It was a Civil War gun. So he goes and gets a Civil War gun, gets a position on the hotel, looking right over where the gang is. And he gets a good shot, and he killed Clell Miller. And I'm looking at the gun in the museum when I'm there on Army reunion, and it's a Smith carbine. This is a British Enfield musket. This was pretty common in the Confederacy because they got them from Britain. And all these guns were more accurate than you might think. In the competition, we would shoot them at 50 yards and 100 yards in like a clay pigeon. And we just stand unsupported and shoot. And we were hitting, at 100 yards, we were hitting a 6-inch towel. This is a canteen. Now I got to thinking, one time it just dawned on me. This is an original. It's got the original cover on it. There's no moth holes into anything. It's in good shape. But it dawned on me that a lot of times on the battlefield, the only treatment that a wounded man got was a drink of water and a kind word. At the Battle of Fredericksburg, the Union had attacked up to Marie's Heights all day, and they were still there when the sun went down. They were wounded all over the battlefield, and both sides heard the wounded crying out and wanting help. And it went on into the next day, daylight, and Sergeant Richard Kirkland of the 2nd South Carolina Infantry couldn't take it anymore. He decided he's going to help these guys if he can. So he goes to the Brigadier General, General Kershaw. And he says, I'd like to get permission to go over there and take some water of those guys. And Kershaw turned him down. And then Kershaw thought about it a little bit. And then he said, okay, you can do it. And then Richard Kirkland said, can I take a white flag? Kershaw said, no, we ain't doing the white flag. So Kirkland said, I'll do the best I can. So he jumped over the wall into enemy territory, into the enemy, with everybody able to see him in daylight, with a load of canteens. And could have been shot by the enemy. If the enemy had shot at him and missed, they would have shot to and gone and got the line of his good guys, Confederates, shooting back, and he would have been caught in a crossfire. But he went anyway, and they realized what he was doing, and then they cheered for him. And then the wounded soldiers started crying out more and more for water, and he was out there for an hour and a half giving water to the wounded soldiers. He became known as the Angel of Marie's Heights. That pretty much covers the relics I brought in. Y'all will be free to come up and look at any of them, handle them however you want. Now I want to put a little local flavor into it. Talk about Company D, 24th Georgia Infantry. I was going to try and do it without these, but my cataract hit me. I might have to get back in.
You need that light, too?
No, I'm good. You're good. I'm good. Company D, 24 Georgia Infantry. The regiment was organized in the summer of 1861, recruiting its members in the following counties: Franklin County, White County, Banks County, Towns County, Rayburn County, Gwinnett County, Elbert County, Hall County, and Habersham County. Captain John Corn organized Company D 24 Georgia Regiment. The Company D was organized here in Towns County, and all the members came from Towns County. And the unit itself participated in 29 skirmishes and battles, starting with 7 days battles, and all the major battles of Lee's Army in Northern Virginia, including the Battle of Gettysburg. Then they went south to Longstreet's Corps. 24th Georgia goes to Longstreet's Corps by train to back up General Bragg at the Battle of Chickamauga. They participated, they didn't get into Chickamauga and fight Longstreet's Corps did, but because of the train ride, the way it worked, and I'll tell about that a little later on. But the 24th Georgia Infantry Regiment was not unloaded from the train in time for the battle. The Longstreet's Corps was, and Longstreet's Corps was an integral part of the battle. After the battle, they went on the Knoxville campaign, and they tried to retake Knoxville from where General Burnside kept Knoxville. They were unsuccessful in that, and they returned to General Lee's army in Northern Virginia, just in time for the Battle of the Wilderness. Then they fought in the Battle of Spotsylvania, the Battle of Cold Harbor, and then they went into the trenches and got bogged down in Petersburg. And Lee's army and Grant's army were bogged down for 9 months. During that time, in the 9-month period, 24th Georgia Infantry was also sent to help General Early's army in the 1864 campaign in the Shenandoah Valley. And when he got up there, they were in the Battle of Cedar Creek. Then they came back to Petersburg, and then, of course, the Yankees broke through the line. The Confederates broke out. They were on the run. They had to fight at Sailor's Creek. A lot of Confederates were captured at Sailor's Creek, and it led up to the surrender at Appomattox. But I'm going to get into it a little bit deeper than that. Captain Corn, Captain Corn, who organized the 24th Georgia Infantry, he was a preacher in his younger days. He and his father and brothers preached to the Cherokee Indians. They preached and organized churches in North Carolina and in North Georgia. John Corn was licensed to preach at Macedonia Baptist Church in 1842. And he was ordained at Macedonia in 1844. In 1860, John Corn and Elijah Kinsey. Thank you. They were the 2 delegates from Towns County that went to the meeting in Milledgeville, the capital of Georgia at the time, to decide whether Georgia ought to secede from the Union or not. They rode by horse, on horseback, on a 400-mile round trip. And most of them were slave owners. Neither one of them favored secession, and they voted against it. But on August the 24th, 1861, he organized and signed all the people into the Company D. And in that Company D, you got Carter, show number 6. Look, and number 6.
Oh.
I can go that way. God bless you. This is a picture of my great uncle. This is Leander Jackson Barone. He went by Jack Barone. Now, he was named in the letter that was written by William J.H. Carter. And what I had really was Carter's record. You got that?
Yep.
I looked up, well, that's Denton Young. Yeah, there's William Carter right there. But he's the one that wrote the letter. And in this letter, that was dated January 3rd, 1863, at a camp near Fredericksburg, he started talking about three people that were his messmates. He was talking about Jack Barone. He talked about Pink Osborne. And Pink Osborne was John Pinckney Osborne, but he went by Pink. And then there was John Denton. And I got to thinking, that'd be good just to take those four guys and try and figure out what happened to them throughout the battle history of the 24th Georgia Infantry. I also decided to add one more. My uncle, John Pinckney Barone, who also went by Pink, and he was a lieutenant, and he ended up getting in a little trouble, and they wrote these fantastic documents about him, so I wanted to include that in there to help tell the story. But basically what I'm going to do is tell the story about the 24th Georgia Infantry, the battle history, and if I don't specifically mention these guys, then they're still in the action. They're still going strong. If I tell you at a certain point something happened to them, then they're not in the action anymore. When the 24th Georgia Infantry was first formed up, the first place it went was to Camp Bartow in Clarksville in Habersham County. This is where they joined up with the other companies for the 24th Georgia Infantry and where they organized as a regiment. They stayed there for a couple of days, and then they went to Camp Randolph in Gordon County, near Calhoun. Then a week later, they went to Camp McDonald at Big Shandy, which is modern-day Kennesaw. And from there, they went to Camp Davis in Campbell County, Virginia. That's near the fairgrounds in Lynchburg, and that was a major training camp. That's where they received their training. When they got done with their training, there was a little town on the coast down in North Carolina. The Union Navy was active down there, and the people in the town of Washington, North Carolina, they decided we're going to try and do something where we can just kind of hinder the Yankees a little bit. So they took the lens out of their lighthouse, and they took and hid it in the town. And apparently the Yankee activity was so strong that they created a Camp Washington, North Carolina. And that's on the Pamlico River right at the Pamlico Sound. And that was the first duty station of the 24th Georgia Infantry. And they stayed there until the spring of 1862. In the spring of 1862, was McClellan. He was in a peninsula campaign going up the peninsula along the James River right towards Richmond. And he was making his progress, and he was getting there. And the one commanding the troops against him was Joseph E. Johnston. And Johnston retreated and retreated and retreated just like he did in the Atlanta campaign. And he left the Union troops within 12 miles of Richmond. And then he was wounded. When he got wounded, Robert E. Lee took him. And that's when Lee first took command of the Army of the Northern Virginia. And Lee started right away in the 7th Day campaign. And what he did was a series of battles, hard fought. Oftentimes they lost more men than the Yankees, and they lost battles, but they pushed the Yankees back. And the big point that the 24th Georgia Infantry Regiment was involved in was the Battle of Malvern Hill. The Yankees had the high ground, they had a lot of artillery on top, and the Confederates tried to charge up that hill, take it. The 24th Georgia Infantry was in that battle, and that was their big part of the battle, and the Confederates failed miserably. It was a stunning loss for the lead army, but it also put the scare into General McClellan, and he backed up and left the Peninsula Campaign. After that, the lead army decided, okay, we're on the move, let's go on up, and they went into the Second Manassas Campaign. And after the Second Manassas, they moved on up to Harper's Ferry. They did a siege on Harper's Ferry, and they captured the Yankees there. After Harper's Ferry, the unit was moving in, Lee was moving into Maryland, and he was trying to have a rear guard action and keep the people off his back on the way up there. And the 24th Georgia Infantry was involved in a rear guard action at Crampton's Gap. At Crampton's Gap, they fought a rear guard action, and the regiment, 24th Georgia, took 43% casualties. Of the 126 men engaged, there were 292 men engaged, and 126 were casualties. And they ended up going from that, they traveled all night long to get to the Battle of Antietam. When they got to the Battle of Antietam, Antietam started with Hooker up in the north woods, Jackson was over in the west woods, and there were other Union troops over here in the east woods. There's a cornfield right in front. The battle started at 5:30 in the morning with heavy cannon fire on both sides in the dark, firing at each other through the cornfield. Then after the battery fire, the Union soldiers saw Confederate bayonets sticking up through the corn stalks. And they charged into the corn stalks after the Confederates. Well, the bad thing about the cornfield, and it was the cornfield itself, you couldn't see anything. So they charged right on up to the Confederates, and they ran into reinforcements for the Confederates and brick walls. So they break and they run back. Well, the Confederates see them charging or retreating, and they charge out. And then they come up to reinforcements from the north. And the north chases the Confederates back. And they went back and forth like that, just fighting each other into oblivion, until Hooker started his action and moved into the west woods toward Jackson. When that happened, about that time is when the 24th Georgia came up from Crampton's Gap. They marched all night to get there. They were dog tired. They got there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they said, "We need a rest." And they said, "Okay." As soon as they laid down, they said, "No, we need to get up and fight." So they did. They got up and they fought heavily in the west woods. And then later on in the day, we got the next one. The battle shifted. It shifted from up here down into the Bloody Lane. This is it. This is Battle Creek. And what they did is they shifted from the west woods down this way, kind of a curve, and then to the Bloody Lane and the Sunken River. And that's where the 24th Georgia was ending up in the battle there. They were in the thick of the fight at Sharpsburg or Antietam. And then from there, they went toward Fredericksburg. At the Battle of Fredericksburg, They were Marie's Heights. This, if you look here, this is the Flawless Division. That's what they were in. I don't know if it shows caught in there, but right in there at the rock wall in Sunken Road, they had a fantastic defensive position. And in that position, Burnside kept charging the hill. And he sent 7 divisions into battle there, piecemeal. And they made 14 different charges. And they were against us. Not a single man reached the Sunken Road. Not a single man reached the stone wall. Now, Burnside, he was not that great of a tactical fighter. He wasn't that sharp. He made mistakes there. He made mistakes at other places too. But he did have a really neat set of facial hair. And that's why we call them sideburns today. Next, I go to the Battle of Chancellorsville. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, what happened is Lee split his, it was considered his tactical genius, his best battle. And he split his army twice in front of a numerical superior enemy. What he did is he sent Jackson on a roundabout route to come in this way on these Yankees, and to suppress that, he had McLaw's division here fighting Yankees like the battle was going on. Well, McLaw's division is where the 24th Georgia Infantry was here, trying to help consider Jackson's move, conceal his move. And of course, they had Union people still over here, and part of the split was to keep these Union soldiers from joining up with others. So this one split, the other split from Jackson. And the 24th Georgia was involved right there to help Jackson. And of course, that was a great battle, but one of the bad things about it, he lost Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson was killed, not as he was making that charge and going around, but in the evening he went to scout after he'd been successful. He wanted to scout and see what it was going to be like the next day. And he was coming back in the dusk, and he surprised some of his own men, and they got scared, didn't recognize who he was, and they shot him. And he was wounded in the left arm, and he was amputated. And while he was waiting to be cured, pneumonia set in. And they knew he was dying. He was a real religious man. They told him on a Sunday, he's going to die. And he said, that's good. I always wanted to die on a Sunday. Well, that's kind of a religious man. But they lost him, and they lost a great general on that, and it probably would have made a big difference in the Civil War if it hadn't happened. But then again, it did. And you can't go to history about what if. The biggest battle in the land, North American soil, like I said earlier, was the Battle of Gettysburg. And that started when they went in looking for Hughes. It started in the north part of town, and I don't have that on the map, but in the north part of town, Henry Heath's division was coming in from the north. Buford's cavalry got there the day before, saw it, and they went up to meet them, and they started a little bitty battle up there on the north side of town. Throughout the day, more Confederates came in, more Union came in, and they kept coming in throughout the whole day. At the end of the day, the Confederates had run the Yankees all the way through the town into a defensive position on Cemetery Ridge. North of Cemetery Ridge was Culp's Hill. The south of Cemetery Ridge was Little Round Top. The Confederates set up directly on the other side of the Emmitsburg Road, facing them. And they had like north-south battle lines, one side of Emmitsburg Road, the other on the other side of Emmitsburg Road. On the second day, it went in. This is Lawless Division here. This is Rose's Farm. This is Wofford's Brigade, and they were in Ross's Brigade. They went into the wheat field. There was heavy fighting in the wheat field. And they were doing so good at it that they were in the peach orchard, and they ran the Yankees back into the wheat field. And then they kept the Yankees running and ran the Yankees all the way back to the little round top at the base. And then they called the charge off. And Wofford, for the rest of his life, was convinced that if they hadn't called it off, that he could have carried the day. He could have gone up, run off, turn their flank, and run down the Union Line. But that's another what if, and you can't go by what if. But the 24th Georgia was right in the middle of that. And then there's one thing that happened after that. This is in a waffle, by the way. You want to let them in there. Right here, if you'll look, this is John Penn Osborne, killed at Gettysburg. He died right there. Now, what happened when they died? He took the Confederates that were laying around. Some of them just let them rot where they fell. But then others, they just buried them and put them in a shallow grave. Then the Union soldiers, when they did their burying detail, they cleaned them up in a hurry. And they put them most in the new National Cemetery in Gettysburg. But it wasn't until 1873 that the Ladies Memorial Association in Wake County, North Carolina, decided to get up there and try and see if they could find the dead Confederate soldiers and do something about identifying them and getting buried. Not long after that, they were joined by similar ladies organizations in Georgia and South Carolina. Okay, in this same battle, this is W.J.M. Carter. He's the one that wrote the letter. Now, Osborne was one of the messmates that was written about the letter. He's the guy that wrote the letter. He was captured at the Battle of Gettysburg. When he got captured at the Battle of Gettysburg, he was first taken to Fort McHenry, where they did it's famous for the Star Spangled Banner. But that's where he first went when he went there. And then from Fort McHenry, he went to Fortress Monroe. And then he went as a prisoner to Point Lookout, Maryland. Now, Point Lookout, Maryland was a big collection point for Yankee prisoners. They had 20,000 prisoners there at one time. They didn't have any barracks at all. They all slept in camps. Then William H. Carter was there for a year. He had all he could take of it. And he decided, okay, I don't think I can spend the rest of my time rotting in this Yankee prison. So he decided to join the Yankees. It's what they call galvanized. He became a galvanized soldier, galvanized Yankee. And when he joined the Yankees, he went west to fight the Indians instead of fighting the Confederates. So he goes out there and said, that's the prisoners. There were prisoners at Gettysburg. And this right here shows where he joined the U.S. service. And the first place he went was out at Fort Rice. That's in Dakota Territory, right where the Sioux were, and the Sioux Indians. And the first thing they did when they got there was they had to build a fort brand new. They had to build barracks, build corrals, and all this stuff. But while they were doing that, they also had herdsmen out, and two of the herdsmen were, let's see, I get ahead of myself sometimes. I know what's coming next, but I gotta get the picture of it. But anyway, the herdsman, well, there were two of them that were out in the herdsman, and they got shot by airplane. There was another one that they thought was captured by the Indians. And then after that, Carter died. He was only there 4 months before he died of disease. And then he was buried at Fort Rice. And then Fort Rice went defunct in 1878, and they took him and reburied him at Fort Abraham Lincoln. Fort Abraham Lincoln went defunct in 1891. So they took him and they buried him at Custer National Battlefield Monument. And he's buried out there today. And he's on Ohio Section A, Site A, 413. Now, after the Battle of Gettysburg, there were two left that were still in the mess base. That's Leander Jackson, Rock, and John Denton. So right after the Battle of Gettysburg, Longstreet's Corps goes south by train, back up General Bragg at the Battle of Chickamauga. And right after that, my uncle Pink, John Pinckney Barone, he deserted. And they brought up charges on him. And they wanted his name stricken from the roll. And if you look there, his name is dropped from the roll. And then they wrote up the next document. This is the charges he brought up. This one is the one that he did on the lower level, and they wanted to drop his name from the roll. But if you look at it, it's signed by Lieutenant Fuller, and it's signed by H.H. Smith, who was the captain, and also the acting major. Then it's signed by General Walker. Then it goes up to General Kershaw. And then it goes to the Inspector General James Godwin. But it's kind of interesting that all those guys signed this document. And the document, if you go to it, basically what it says is hard to read, but in the middle it says that he left the unit and he refused to come back. He told him he wasn't coming back, and he told him he was going to organize a company of cavalry. And they brought up charges on him, and they suggested they drop his name from the roll. So then they brought up another document, charges for being AWOL, being a deserter. This one is signed by Lieutenant McCool, and you've got Captain Smith in here somewhere. And then you've got C.C. Sanders as the colonel, and that's Christopher Columbus. And here's General Walker's signature, General Kershaw, General Longstreet's signature, General Robert E. Lee's signature. Now, I think it's kind of fancy that when you have that many general signatures on one document. I'd love to have that document myself. It's kind of like local boy makes good, except your brother makes good. And if you go to the next part of it, this is the part of the document that's written up, and I'm going to read the charges to you. Okay, it's headed Company B, charged absent without leave. You might be able to read through there, but I don't know. Specification first. In this, that the said First Lieutenant J.P. Long, Company D, 24th Georgia Regiment, was on or about the 28th of October, 1863, sent from his command to a hospital at Caseville, Georgia, which place he received permission to go to his home in Towns County, Georgia, with orders to report every 10 days to the hospital in Caseville. Specification number 2, in that the said First Lieutenant J.P. Long, Company D, 24th Georgia Infantry Regiment, has been reported to his command as being absent without leave from or on or about the 20th day of November 1863. Specification number 3. In this, that the said First Lieutenant J.P. Long, Company D, 24th Georgia Infantry Regiment, has been heard repeatedly to say that he would never return to his command again. Also, that First Lieutenant J.P. Long, Company D, 24th Georgia Infantry Regiment, is at this time attempting and trying to raise a company of cavalry without any known legal or official authority from his commanding officer. All this is to the detriment of the good of the service, and is witnessed by Captain H.H. Smith, W.G. McClure, Second Lieutenant, and Private Lucius Nichols. And of course, you saw the signature on there. Now, the reason I think maybe why he might have done this, and it helps tell the story of the 24th Georgia Infantry Regiment. They went by a train ride down to the Battle of Chickamauga. Trains, and it was the first war they ever used trains to any extent, both sides, to move troops and supplies. But they weren't the trains like we know today. Some of them had rails that were solid iron. Some of them had hollow iron that were like an inverted U shape. Some of them had rails that were wood with just a strip of iron on the top. The rails weren't always the same distance apart. And the private companies that owned them all only operated in limited areas. And they might not even match up with anybody else. So they had to find a way to get Longstreet's Corps down to Chickamauga. The shortest route would have been through Knoxville, coming through Cumberland Gap in Virginia. They couldn't do that because General Burnside had already captured Knoxville. So they had to go the long way. They'd go all the way down from Lee in Virginia, down to Charleston, South Carolina, back up to Atlanta, and then to Ringo, Georgia. Now, this may help tell why the unit got there too late for that. But they weren't very comfortable in the ride. They had to ride wherever they could get in the way of rolling stock. Some of these train companies, they didn't have bridges. Some of them maybe were all freight trains that didn't have ways of carrying people comfortably. So they probably went in box cars and flat cars. And they didn't have pit stops on the way. And it was just a bad experience. And it took them 9 days. And they had to change trains 16 times. And after that, I think what happened to Uncle Pink is he'd say, you know what? I'm kind of tired of being in this infantry. I think I'm going to quit and start my cavalry. But that tells a little bit about the whole deal of what the unit had to go through too. But after that, Longstreet's Corps went on, and the next thing they did, Pink's not in it anymore. He was captured, by the way, by the Yankees, taken to Knoxville, and signed the oath of allegiance on November 30th, 1864. So he told the Yankees, I'm okay with y'all, I'll be one too. He didn't join the Yankees, but he said, I'm in good with the United States from here on out. And of course, he didn't live up to that either. A little bit later on, he was in the records as private in the 11th Georgia Infantry. Then Longstreet's Corps goes on up in the campaign to retake Knoxville on Burnside. And they were in the battle at Fort Sumter. Now, in this particular battle, this is the fort here. It's an urban fort. And this is a moat that goes all the way around. It's not full of water, but it's a big ditch. These stumps, all the trees were cleared, but they purposely left the stumps. They tied wire crisscross and all through, connected all these stumps to make it worse for the hazard than just the stumps. The Confederates out in the distance couldn't see the stumps and the wires. They couldn't see the moat. They ordered a charge, and they were running full out in a charge to get there and go up and take the fort. And they didn't see these hazards until it was too late. And it was really devastating. It was a one-sided battle. The northern group here had 13 casualties. The Confederates attacking had 813 casualties. And after that failed attempt, Longstreet's Corps goes back into Virginia, and they join Robert E. Lee's army of Northern Virginia right before the Battle of the Wilderness. This is the Battle of the Wilderness. It was fought in heavy woods. If you've ever shot black powder, it makes a lot of smoke. Lots of smoke. In the heavy woods, the black powder just hung there. So what happened is, Lee saw Grant coming down through the woods, and he took up a position on the side waiting for an opportune point to attack. And when he did attack, Longstreet, his group came in, and they were the main part of the attack, and they were really successful for quite a while. And down here is Wofford's brigade. They're in flank attack. And Longstreet's flank attack was somewhat successful but it was hard to keep the line straight and see where you were and keep the maneuver going, see who's who, and keep the line and all the smoke that was in the woods and stuff. So the attack failed, and Longstreet was shot by his own men. And after that battle, see, Grant, what he did, every time he'd get to battle, whether he won or not, he was different than all the other Union generals. And they'd have a big battle, the previous Union generals, they'd fight, they might lose, they might win. If they'd go back to Washington and lick the wood. Grant didn't do that. Grant kept the pressure on Lee the whole time. If Grant lost the battle, he didn't turn and go back north. He cut south. Tried to put the pressure on Lee, and he tried to move closer to Richmond. And he kept Lee having to fight too, and the attrition was worse on the Confederates than it was the Yankees. So then they go from the Wilderness into the Battle of Spotsylvania. In this particular battle, Lee saw them coming, he knew they were coming, so he dug in and hit his fortification. Right here in the middle of the fortification, the attack was where the 24th Georgia Infantry was. So they took the brunt of that. Then it was hard fought, no clear victory, but they still cut south. Grant's going south, and he goes to Cold Harbor. And at Cold Harbor, Grant got there first, and he took control of the crossroads. When he gets to the crossroads, Lee sees it, and he sets up on the west side. And he digs in and does very heavy fortifications again. And Grant charged right into those fortifications. You see this massive charge right here from Grant? Waffles Brigade is right in the middle of that chart. That's the 24th Georgia Infantry in that brigade. Now, after this battle, Cold Harbor, there's only 2 guys left from the original 11 in the messmates, Leander Jackson Barone and John Denton. Both of them were captured. They captured Cold Harbor, John Denton won, so was Leander Jackson Barone. They went to Point Lookout, Maryland, and that was the fort that had 20,000 people. From there, they were taken by steamship and then locomotive up to New York. They went by steamship to New York, and then from locomotive, they went from New York to New Jersey, Pennsylvania, into New York at Elmira Prison. Okay, now go back. Good. Now, while they were on the way up there, they're going through Pennsylvania. They get to Shohola, Pennsylvania, and between Shohola and the next station up, Lackawaxen Junction, there are 2 tracks that are parallel. Go down to 1 track. They only had room through the hilly territory and the harsh curves to have a single track for a half a mile. So what they had to do to control it was to have the guy that's down in the Shohola, Pennsylvania station. He says, "Look, it gets on telegraph. We've got a train coming through. Let them through. Don't send anybody south while we're coming through." So they send that message up to Lackawaxen. The agent at Lackawaxen, Douglas Kent, had gone to a party the night before. He probably stayed out a little bit too long, and he got home, he was probably sleepy. And the truth is, he might have been vibed a little bit too. So he got up the next day to go to work, and he's at least sleepy, and maybe he has a hangover. So the message is sent to him. We have this prisoner plane on the Erie Railroad. Don't let anybody else on the track while this prisoner plane's coming through. Douglas Kent didn't get that message. So then a train coming south that had 50 cars full of coal. It was okay to give them the go-ahead by Douglas Kent to go on. So you got a train with 3 boxcars and 12 coaches full of prisoners, 831 prisoners, plus our 2, Denton and Vermont, plus Union guards on a dead-end course with a train coming down loaded with coal, 50 cars. And of course, they met going at 50 miles an hour combined. And the engines immediately ended up in a cave. They just kind of locked like that. The impact was so great at the beginning that the coal tender was knocked both up, and all the wood from that was thrown straight onto the fireman, and he was instantly killed. The engineer, Mr. Ingram, was pinned between a slab from the boiler and part of the cab. And it was steam everywhere. And people went to get up to him, and he said, "Don't come. This boiler might blow." And from the steam and the heat, he just roasted and died. Then the cars that the prisoners were in, they were like, there was 12 coaches, there were 3 boxcars. The cars closest to the engine was where most of the injuries were. And there were several guards killed and several Confederate soldiers killed. They were also wounded all over. And the cars, of course, like they were crunched together and kind of telescoped into each other, or then flip or turn and get mangled. And it was said that one of the cars that originally was 40 feet in length was compressed down to a 6-foot wide. And then they tried to get there, the townspeople from Shohola tried to get there and help them out. And they did. And they got what they could for the wounded and got them out. And the dead they buried right at the bottom of the hill. And they stayed at the bottom of the hill until 1911, when they were reinterred and put in Woodlawn National Cemetery in Belmont. But then the wounded were finally taken care of, and they made their way finally to Belmont Prison. But when they get to the prison, also go back there. This is Jack Brown's pension application, and in it he says that he was pinned under the coach and had his bust flat in his abdomen. And then he also says that he suffered from the cold in the prison itself. That's in the prison. When they got to the prison, this is Elmira Prison, but it had barracks, but not enough. It was originally a training center. And then after that, they went to kind of a shipping station. And then they decided to make it into a prison camp. When they made it into a prison camp, they said, we only have enough barracks for maybe 2,000 people. If we put up tents, we might take 5,000. So William Hoffman, the one that was in charge of the prisons in the north, sent 12,000 eventually to Elmira Prison. And even though they built some barracks, most of them stayed in tents the entire time. Some were running no matter what. And that's what they had to deal with. Now, they also decided that they were, before they ever got to the prison, Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War of the North, and William Hoffman decided, you know what, we got prisoners here. They're not campaigning, they're not doing all the activity that normal soldiers involved, they're just sitting around in the prison. They don't need as much food, so they cut rations. And then they got to thinking, you know what, we don't think, you know, if they got clothes, and they got a blanket, we don't need to supply them with any clothes and any blankets either. And if they had adequate clothes and blankets for them, if they were wearing rags, that was sufficient. They didn't need any more clothes. If they had rags for a blanket, that was sufficient. They didn't need any more blankets. In the death rate for northern prisons during the Civil War was 11.7%. The death rate in Andersonville prison, which is notorious, was 28.4%. The death rate in Elmira prison was 24.4%. Now, on the surface, it's worse than, it's worse than it looks like on the surface for Elmira. See, the Confederates, because of the blockade, they didn't even have supplies and food and clothing for their own men, let alone for prisoners. The Yankees didn't have any blockade. They had plenty of food, they had plenty of supplies, but they just refused to give it to them. Okay, now while they were there was an enterprising man, and that was Mr. Nichols. He brought the acre of land right across the street from the northeast corner of the prison. He built an observation tower, so all the Yankee citizens could go up in the tower and look at the Confederates, what they were doing in the prison and their music. And he had the upper deck that was open, that provided a greater view. The lower deck was sheltered. It would give you shelter from the sun and the rain. And he put up a sign on his sign said, an observation tower from which to view the prison. Admission, 15 cents. Refreshments served below. Now, he made so much on this, and it was so popular that it paid for itself in 2 weeks. So then, Mr. W.W. Meeks decided he'd build an observation tower, and he built it a block further down the road. Because he was a block further down the road, he made his tower 3 stories tall, and he charged 5 cents a lift. So the prisoners were in there and they were suffering. They didn't have the blankets, they didn't have the rations, and they had to adapt. One thing they did is they ate rats, and they even caught and sold rats. And they would sell a rat for 5 cents a piece. And to keep from getting bored, they play games, or they would make trinkets out of bone, cardwood and bone, make trinkets and stuff to sell. And I showed you those rings over there. You might want to take another look at those, but that's the kind of thing they did there. And to stay warm, they would spoon. Sometimes 5 men together spooning to share body heat. Now, these 5 men probably all had body lice. And none of them had a bath in several months. But they did what they could to share body heat. And they also lived in a pond in the middle of the ground, and it was right next to the train, and it filled up with fecal matter, and it got spread to the seas everywhere. So it was really bad conditions there. But they survived it, and they weren't the only ones from Company D that were there. There were 10 men total from Company D, 24th Georgia Infantry, and the Elmira prison. One of the 10, A.W.C. Hooper, was exchanged on October the 29th, 1864. The reason they had that exchange was they wanted to get rid of the prisoners that were really in bad health or bad disease. The catch was you had to be in good enough shape to survive the exchange process. But A.W.C. Hooper was exchanged and apparently survived the process. Then later on, there were 3 that died there, and they were taken to Woodlawn Cemetery. This is the Confederate Cemetery of Woodlawn, and they're buried out there. Show next one. This is also a monument to the Shohover train wreck. On one side, it has commemoration for the Union soldiers, the guards that died in the train wreck, and on the other side, it has a commemoration for the Confederates that died. So 6 of the 10 that were prisoners at Elmira prison were released at the end of the war and came home. That includes the 2 that were left out of our messmates, John Denton and Jack Barone, were able to come home at the end of the war. And then there were 2 that William W. Eller and Andrew J. Wood were released on July 7th. That's the same day that Jack Barone was released. Our family tradition has that Jack Barone walked home from Elmira prison, that he was barefooted, and it took him several months to get home. And when I read about 2 other people getting out at the same time that he did, it makes more sense. I think he'd be more willing to try and take on that long journey walking home if he had 2 companions to go with him. So I think that just maybe that might be a way out. And maybe the Eller family and the Wood family have some information in their family tradition about him walking home too. But then after that's all the people that we were keeping up with in the 24th Georgia Infantry, the farm and the mess group. After that, in Petersburg, the William Grant got bogged down for 9 months. And they left for a little while to go up into the Valley campaign. And they were at the Battle of Cedar Creek. They came back to Petersburg. And then there was a breakout at Petersburg. And they were on the run. They had a fight at Sailor's Creek. And a lot of Confederates were captured at Sailor's Creek. And then there was the surrender at Appomattox. Of the 660 men that were effective in the company, in all of the Georgia Infantry, 24th Georgia Infantry, in April of '62, when they first started taking operations in the field, only 59 surrendered at Appomattox. There were 4 officers, and the rest were men. And there was one man on 24th Georgia Company D in our group, and that was Richard F. Wheeler. And of course, that ended the war with surrender, but then we all know how the war ended. When Private Turner personally accepted the surrender of Abraham Lincoln. That's all I have, but when we're done.